been a lot of different places where I've been in situations, and I've also witnessed it a lot, where you're in a public place and something is happening and someone is misbehaving, and the whole community can become like a mob. So there's mob mentality. Like in the old days, we had mob mentality. And I think like this is still very much a natural response in human, but I think that we've lost our ability to operate as a mob because we've lost our ability to communicate. What do you guys think about that? Maybe the reason we have this crowd mentality is because we've got a crowd of people and no one's talking to each other. So you don't have a group, you have a crowd of individuals. Where when I was younger, when there was a big group of people, we would turn around and talk to the other people near us. It was normal to communicate with each other. So there was a sense of camaraderie that would build in a group. And these days, you'll have a group and each person's on their phone. And so each person is like a separate pod disconnected from the group. They don't feel that we're in a group. They don't feel like the person next to me's got my back and I've got the person next to me's back. Because deep down, if a man sees a woman getting beaten physically, right? There should be an instinct within him to say, hey, this is disgusting. Right? And maybe he doesn't want to do anything about it because he doesn't want to face consequences. But if he knows the one next to him's got his back and he's got the one next to his back and there's a big group of us and we're all going to approach that one together, that's a sense of camaraderie. And I noticed this when I was in a hotel many years ago, and I worked there for a short period of time when I got back to the UK, and there was sexual abuse in the kitchen, and I had to step in, and I basically got a whole strike organized. But the interesting thing was, people get very scared, and before you know it, you're all on your own, you know, and people just want to run for the hills. So I think this fear is the cause that people don't do anything. I think because people have been so indoctrinated by fear, and fear only works if you feel like you're alone. If you feel like you're in a group and you feel like you've got a good network, support network, then you have nothing to be afraid of. So has our support networks become weakened? What do you think of that as a notion, Cosmic, on a fundamental psychological level?
I was thinking it might be a cultural thing. You know, maybe in America we're less likely to help out than in South Africa. I could totally see that being a possibility too.
It's changed, yeah, too. This is what I'm saying. It's changed, yeah. That's what I've noticed is when I first got to the UK, it was different. When I came back to the UK at different times, it was different. Life. Sorry, yeah.
Go on, finish what you were saying, but I got a question about.
I was just, I noticed that every country I went to, this change was happening. I watched the change happening. I watched the people becoming more separate to each other. And coming back to South Africa was a shock. It was like, wow, South Africa's changed in similar ways that other countries have changed. I didn't expect to see it here, but I've definitely observed it and witnessed it here as well.
All right, I have a question. I feel like the news has impacted the way that we see strangers. And a lot of people have gone from hitchhikers being okay and I want to help somebody out and give them a ride to I would never pick up a hitchhiker. They're all serial killers. And so people have this idea in their head now. If you don't know somebody, they're definitely a thief or serial killer because they watch the news. And they show these 1 in a million situations where something bad happens. And so they assume that every single person that they don't know is one of those people. And it's very common. I see that amongst people. And to me, I find it astounding. I'm a person that used to hitchhike and I've kind of given up over the years. But I found that people from California were the only ones that were ever willing to pick me up. They kind of have a different vibe. They're more trusting. Maybe older people would pick me up sometimes.
I mean, it's also technically illegal to pick up a hitchhiker in the United States, so that could also be a possibility too. Maybe people also don't want to get in trouble with the law.
I don't think that's part of it, really, because if I was driving a car and I pitched up a hitchhiker, I'd just tell the hitchhiker, "Look, we know each other, right? You're my cousin, okay?" And the officer comes to the window. There you go. It's not that hard to get out of that. But I mean, people are pretty scared, so that might be something that discourages them. A lot of people are really controlled by fear, and so they might think, "Oh, I'm not going to do that because then he'll get me with all this other stuff too." So that's a whole other thing as well. I wasn't really aware of that. I don't know how much they prosecute that, but I could see why they're trying to help people out from being victimized in that situation because some hitchhikers are uh, out to get people, I guess.
Here's the thing, though, right?
Yeah.
I used to hitchhike a lot, everywhere. I used to hitchhike all around my city. I used to hitchhike all around my country. I used to hitchhike in the UK. I used to hitchhike all around Israel. I even did some hitchhiking in Canada. It was a good thing. It worked. I was really good at hitchhiking. I put my thumb out before, I've got like a queue of cars. Like, okay, no. Yeah, I'll go with you. It was almost like that sometimes. Like more than one people would stop. You go, wow. Like when it rains and pours, there's three of you. You look cool, But it was illegal I remember us having conversations about this in the early 1990s. It was illegal to hitchhike then, in the same way that it's illegal to hitchhike now. And the police were more proactive about hitchhiking in the 90s than what they are now.
Right.
I remember the police actually stopping to tell me a number of times when I was younger that it's actually not legal to hitchhike. It's called jaywalking. They used to say to me. And I used to be, I'm not hitchhiking. They'd be, what do you mean? I'm just holding my thumb up so that my friend who's going to be driving down the road recognizes me.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. That's what I'd say to them. So I'm waiting for a friend. I've arranged to be picked up. Yeah. This was before cell phones existed.
Yeah.
I said, my friend said they're going to come and pick me up on the road. It's easier than them driving to my house. Besides, I was at somebody else's house. So then the cops would be like, okay, because it's illegal to hitchhike. I mean, of course it's illegal. Who's going to hitchhike? But they'd see this face everywhere, like my friend.
Right.
But, so I think you're right, India. I don't think it's about the legislation against hitchhiking because it was always illegal. But there was a different vibe. And even in Cape Town, hitchhiking would be hard to do now these days. Like in the 90s, hitchhiking was so common, right? I remember when I was like 19, I hitchhiked thousands of miles around my country.
Cool.
Thousands of miles. Just a single trip. I just decided I'm doing a whole trip. I'm going to do my whole loop of my country. Just hitchhiked it. I met such cool people on my trip. These people I met, hey, come spend the night at my place in Durban. I'm like, oh, cool, yeah. And then I'd meet these people and they say, oh, come to our farm. Come and have supper on our farm and spend the night on our farm. And I was like, hey, thank you. Yeah. So like I hardly even stayed in bed and breakfasts because I met such cool people. So my point is like there was a different energy. And the reason why hitchhiking doesn't happen, I believe, is because people don't talk to each other anymore.
Yeah.
What am I going to do with a stranger sitting in my car? What am I going to do? The whole point of hitchhiking was conversation. You get into a car, you're like, hey, how's it going? No, my name's, so what are you doing here? Oh, I'm doing this. No. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going here. So what do you do? Oh, I do this, and that's what I'm going about. Do you mind if I light a spliff? Thought you'd never offer, So, we used to talk so much more. It was so normal to talk to each other, to talk to strangers. And when I got to the UK, I noticed, well, people don't talk to each other much here, but I really watched the decline of communication with smartphones becoming a thing. The little bit of communication that there was got less and less. And I used to sometimes get people on the tubes talking. Like I would, in the early 2000s, I'd get the whole tube talking. They're all sitting there quietly, and I'm looking at them all. I said, so what's wrong with you people? All like looking. And be like, you're sitting next to a bunch of people. Nobody's talking. And I start having a conversation with the people, and maybe they'll laugh. They're like, nervous laughter, like, I mean, that's better. You got a pretty smile, haven't you? And so I'd start having that conversation with the people. Next thing, like before you know, everybody's talking to everybody. Like that's how life was when I was young. Everybody spoke to everybody. You wouldn't go and stand in a queue in a shop without having a conversation with the person behind you. It would be considered rude. You're in a queue, hi, how are you going? Yeah. It was normal to have a conversation. These days, everybody's like minding their own business, or they're on their phones, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. And, I still am a bit of a maverick when it comes to that. I look in people's trolleys, go, ooh, that's got sodium benzoate in it. That's got like xenoestrogens in it. Ooh, it's gonna make your titties go all flappy. Oh, that's gonna give you uterus cancer. Oh, you're gonna watch that stuff. I'm like, people like pull big eyes and stare at me like, oh my gosh,
they don't know
being open. Yeah. I'll tell people, you seriously, you feeding your kid that? You may as well go and have them diagnosed for ADHD. Like that's what you're giving them, But I do think that there's a communication breakdown between people, which is a big deal. And when I look at this communication, how logical is it to have a text-based conversation with someone?
Not very.
Just think of the logic behind it, right? So how long does it take you to think of what you want to say, then write it, then fix any typos?
Yeah.
Then read it, make sure that it's right, then send it. Then they've got to read it on the other side, think about what they want to say, type it out, type it, check their typos, or have typo check it for them, and send it back to you. And so I could have said what I wanted to say, and you could have responded in half the time that it took me to type out the text. And so what we did in 10 texts over 10 minutes, we could have done in 1 minute of talking, or 2 minutes.
That's so true.
Because it'd be instant response. But people are scared of instant response. A lot of people are very scared of having actual real communication.
I remember when text messaging first became a thing in high school, and I was kind of like, what's the point? Like, why? It feels like talking is more efficient than typing with text. So I actually was kind of like, I really didn't jump into the cell phone bandwagon until I was basically forced into it. At a certain point, like people just kind of like the peers around you just, damn it, you got to get a cell phone. But I resisted for a pretty long time with that sort of thing. So it was just like, why are we doing that? It's like, we might as well just go back to like Morse code or whatever. This feels like a step backward in technology.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I kept my phone plugged into the wall when I got my first cell phone for years, and I swore I would never take it off of that wall. I don't know what happened. I wish I had. But no, I think a lot of people have this feeling of anxiety when they come up to somebody. They feel nervous. They're thinking about all their hesitance. Maybe I shouldn't talk to them because maybe I shouldn't associate with them. Maybe they'll feel imposed when I speak to them and I shouldn't talk to them. Maybe they'll feel like I have some ulterior motives. And I think people feel that when you come up to them and you're about to talk and you look a bit strange and you have these thoughts like you want to talk. If you're apprehensive, I don't think it's going to happen because people are going to pull back on both sides. But when you're kind of gregarious and fearless like myself, and you just kind of wander up to people and you just initially just start it right off the bat, like, hey, how are you doing today? What's happening? Some people will just kind of look down and look away. That's all it is. But other people will talk back to you. I'm doing well. How are you? It's usually older people, from my experience. And
I get on better with older people.
Me too. I get along way better with them. They're more open. And I'll end up talking about like, hey, I take ginger for my joints. Do you ever take that? It's really helpful for me. And I'll tell them about little supplements here and there that they could help and that could help them. Because I learned a lot about these health supplements that I take from reading a lot of magazines for old people. Because they don't really want to tell young people how to prevent themselves from ending up in surgery and on these medications. But they will tell old people how to actually heal their bodies more. So a lot of the tips that I've gotten will help other folks as well, the older people.
That's very interesting because I noticed that too. And people never understood. Like when I spoke to young people, it was a very short exchange. When you speak to old people, it's like they are like, oh, it's like the old days.
Yeah.
We talk to each other because they are not adapting very well to this text-based culture. They don't understand it. They're like, gotta type this word out. Can't we just talk? You know? And isn't it interesting how they don't want us talking?
It is.
So I observed this when cell phones first came out in a big way. Let's go back a quarter of a century, or just a little more than a quarter of a century ago. It was really expensive to make phone calls. And this is like, and I'm not just saying South Africa, I'm talking South Africa, UK, Israel. Same thing in Canada. They had AT&T. I think it was AT&T on my cell network when I was in Canada in the 90s. Yeah. So it was expensive to make calls, but you got a whole lot of text messages given to you that were like free. So like if you topped up money, you'd get, so they basically said to you, here's loads of text messages, use them or don't use them. So you were like stuck with all these free text messages, which you don't want to waste. So people started getting used to texting each other because, well, I've got all these text messages. What am I going to do with them? They're going to just expire. I may as well get as much value for my money as I can from this contract or this top up or whatever this pre-contract thing that, you know, that's how it works in Canada. In the UK, I pretty much had contracts. Sometimes pay as you go. But before we had all these apps, it was like that. And so people were discouraged from making phone calls for financial reasons. Then what happened was calls started getting a little cheaper. Internet became more of a big thing. 1G came up, 2G came up, 2G became 3G. The moment we had 3G, there was like smartphones and Facebook apps, WhatsApp app, and other kinds of communication apps. Telegram wasn't around yet, but there were other kinds of apps like WhatsApp, right? And suddenly people had like infinite free communications ahead of them. If you're on your broadband, you can communicate as much as you want. It doesn't cost you anything. If you're on your, you know, your fiber broadband, in those days it was still copper, but still you would pay like £20 a month. You'd have your broadband and uncapped, unlimited. So as much communications as you could want. And people still then were in the habit of using text, even though all of those apps by that stage had telephone call option. Then 4G came along and pretty much all of those apps upgraded to then being able to have video call. Also free. Now we've got 5G, 6G, whatever. You've got free video call, free phone calls, infinite. And everybody's still texting. And I'm like, at which point do people not realize that they've been conditioned to text? And there's a reason for it, because this social inability to communicate, like, why are people afraid of approaching a stranger to have a conversation? Because they're out of practice. They don't know what it's like to engage with people with voices anymore. And this is one of the reasons why I think all the companies are turning to internet text-based communications for customer services, right? Obviously, the AI systems, easier and cheaper to run, but I think there's a more nefarious principle behind it, which has made it cheaper to run, because these companies could all be running through WhatsApp systems or a free kind of video calling system or a phone calling system. Before, they had the technicians, but then what they had is they had the people working there. And so even before the AI had taken over from the humans, they were still trying to get you to go onto their website and have a conversation with a real person who would help you in their customer services, and you type to someone and they type back and you'd ask questions, but it wasn't an AI yet. And so they've been trying to move us away from voice. Do you think it could be because it's easier to track what you're saying? It's easier to build a dossier on everybody if everybody's typing?
Yeah, because to be able to turn the spoken words into typed words and then review those, I mean, it takes a lot more time to listen to all the words than it would to look over the written words. So if everybody's just writing it down for you, that's a lot faster to be able to process, and then keywords can be highlighted and then they can be put in folders and then people can investigate that without having to lift a finger. It's all automated. So there's definitely an element of that as well. And that's a big thing. But I also feel like there's a pull in texting. If you're somebody that's a lonesome person that just because always alone, doesn't have anybody around, you could make phone calls all the time. You don't have anybody else that's going to be there trying to talk to you over the call or feeling like you're taking away from your time together. Whereas if you're around other people, being able to text, not only will you be able to text to them and speak to somebody else at the same time, but whatever you're texting is in secret. Nobody knows what you're saying to those people. So the confidentiality of it is probably a draw to people, and the ability to communicate with multiple individuals in your environment and text at the same time probably is one of the most helpful aspects of it, I think, personally. But you know what? I think in the future, what we should really be looking towards is having more of a holographic image of the person we're speaking to right amongst us. And so it's like they're right here with us. And then the people that are that are in the room with us understand that they shouldn't be interrupting while they speak, but they could also talk to both of those individuals as well. What do you guys think about that?
You know, I've been thinking about something else that's kind of come to mind to me, and I'm thinking about music. One thing I work in retail, so they play a lot of the popular music that's on the radio. And one thing I've kind of noticed over the years is that music has gotten a lot less melodic. There's not a sense of like a discernible, memorable melody that can hear. Because you think about like songs from the olden days, like you could like hum a tune. It's like, oh yeah, I know that one. That's Funky Town by Limp Bizkit. Nowadays, it's almost like these vocal choruses. It's all like almost like one note. They'll be singing like this, and it's like this repetitive kind of like one note over and over again. And I can't help but feel like when we're talking about the sort of the poverty of speech and communication being simplified through text, it seems like this has an effect on the art we create as well, in terms of, you know, music and the vocabulary we have to creatively express ourselves. One of the things I'm also kind of concerned about is artificial intelligence. And one of the reasons is I think that, you know, a lot of people, you know, artists will say, oh, well, you know, it's not that big of a deal because, like, you know, I'll do art, but then I'll use the artificial intelligence to do kind of the busy work. But I'm worried that the younger generation is not going to be as incentivized to really use their imagination to come up with ideas for stuff, because the AI will just basically do everything for them. Like thinking about all the times you would, you know, daydream, you know, have fantasies and come up with creative ideas. Nothing is really, you know, it's like it's going to be hard to find originality because nobody's going to be incentivized to come up with something original or unique and different because, oh, I'll just have the AI do it for me, you know?
True. Yeah,
so really, it's like the whole thing. It's not just a poverty of communication when it comes to like speech, but I think it also comes to music and the arts and like, you know, even like the media. I think a lot of these like these movies nowadays, they're kind of like dumber. They're a lot more mean spirited. I was thinking about I watched this YouTube series called Red Letter Media, and they do a lot of like, you know, movie and television show reviews. It's like kind of a comedy show, but they were talking about this like Star Trek movie. It was like some like District 31 or something like that, and how they were kind of like. And the thing about Star Trek, you know, in its early conception, one of the reasons that show was so popular with people was because it really provided an optimistic vision of the future where people can work their differences aside. They didn't have to fight. They could talk out their problems. And there's generally a sense of hope and optimism. Now with Star Trek, it's all very violent and it's nihilistic and there's people yelling at each other and it's really just like ugly and dark. And one of the things that was kind of disturbing was, one of the people was commenting is maybe the reason that there's not these optimistic Star Trek futures that people can't comprehend an optimistic future. And so I think what's going on here is that it's like we're losing our ability not just to communicate, but articulate certain artistic ideas and concepts. And
feel that. I think it's interesting in the District 31, they have Philippa Giorgio coming in. She was brought in from another dimension that's an evil dimension. And so she's come in and now she's instigating all these coups and these like rebellions and like this instability and chaos amongst Starfleet. And so everything was like collapsing down into total pandemonium with this character. And as you're right, Cosmic, it kind of reflects the change of the mentality over the years that Star Trek has been running. And if you look at the older Star Trek with the first series, it was very simple and it was very very compassionate. They're all about going out to explore and protect any victims that they find on these other planets and save them, and then gave them some kind of permission to be in their world and come back in return. And they set up all these little situations where they were coming to the aid of these people, and they had like a good whole journey going. And now the journey is all chaos. It's kind of flipped. As you see with the Enterprise in the 90s, it started to make that flip where the captain became a cyborg and was trying to wipe out all of humanity. And then now it's like they flipped it all the way and everything is being run by this evil people from another dimension that have come in here. So yeah, that's a big kind of it's kind of shows a lot about what's happening in our society. But when you just look at this one show, how things have changed morally and ethically over just a few generations of several decades. So it's pretty interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that.
I believe like that's a really on point round of information you guys are sharing here. And totally, as somebody who really has a lot of love for the old Trek, I must admit, I was a little bit of a Trekkie. I'm not like get out your cosplay uniform Trek, but I did enjoy a bit of Trek. I love the idea behind Star Trek. I love the positivity behind Star Trek. Like there's a new world out there. We're going to discover the world. We're going to go out. We're going to make the world a better place. We're going to get everybody help everybody. What a lovely thought. But Star Trek is becoming dark. And I was wondering how long until Doctor Who becomes like a narcissist.
Right.
That's next on the list.
Yep.
Watch the space. Doctor Who series. I wonder whether Doctor Who is going to get a weapon. One day Doctor Who will have a lightsaber and he'll be like chopping people up or something like, from the old days with an electric sonic screwdriver, and he never hurts anybody, So I think you're very right. And it actually points to point this out. Mexico asked a question. Why is the hunger for fear and violence stronger than the hunger for positive future in the movies? And I think that is like really what we're talking about here. And my answer to that question, and I'd love to get your guys' feedback, is that the people that sponsor these films, the producers, have a lot of say in the way in which the director does the work and has done in the past, because the money talks, the BS walks. So these are always very rich billionaires that have been in league with, what's that guy's name?
Younger people.
Epstein and those kind of guys.
Mm-hmm.
So these are people that like children more than they should like children in ways that nobody should ever like children. Billionaires with weird tastes. They like to have orgy kind of parties and God knows what else.
Talk to these kids. Some of these kids are just like dark as hell. It's really upsetting.
I think that like this is really what's going on. I think that the 1% that we were talking about in
There's a contingency.
you know, Occupy
Like,
are making the films,
no.
and they have an
The
agenda
world to
towards
burn
making
to the
humanity
fucking ground.
become a little bit dumbed down. Are you talking
yeah.
to us, dear Cosmic?
What's up?
Are you talking to us?
Oh no, I thought I had myself muted, but I was thinking about like you know, these kids, like when you really like, they have a very different attitude, and it's kind of disturbing. They just have this kind of like, you know, we were talking about, you know, the whole show, like an optimistic future, and to answer Mexico's question about, you know, this idea that why do people care, that, you know, this fear and violence is because like these kids are, a lot of these kids are very angry these days. You know, whatever, regardless of whether political spectrum, there's I talk to a lot of like young people or like, you know, people around there. There's a lot of people they want to see the world burn to the fucking ground. They are just like, you know what, this world is corrupt. This world is screwed. So let's just take the whole thing down. We don't care anymore. Nothing matters. And I think that's reflected in a lot of the media we consume, because if you think about a lot of the media we consume nowadays is made by the younger generation now. Now the millennials are the ones that are at the helm, and they've been spoon-fed a lot of the garbage of the culture, and it's kind of like spending through them. They just have this like, you know, screw you kind of attitude, is like, you know, this kind of woke, we're oppressed, everything is horrible and bad and terrible, and so we need to pout. And, you know, it's this idea that we're not allowed to enjoy our life until the world is literally perfect. Until the world's literally perfect, we have to feel guilty all the time. It's just like, it's just such a minefield that these kids have to freaking go through. Like, even I thought my, you know, adolescence was, you know, complex and difficult. And it also doesn't help the fact that I think culturally speaking, you know, it's a lot more fragmented nowadays. Because if you think about back in the 90s, if there was a popular movie that came out, like everybody would be quoting that movie. Everybody would be saying lines from it. If there's a cultural event that happened, we all kind of watch TV and we all kind of like stick forward. Now with the internet and social media, all the cultural kind of milieu is kind of like sort of scattered, and, you know, it's kind of all over the place. So there's not really a lot of like cohesion culturally speaking. There's not really one big culture. It's a lot of micro cultures that are kind of at war with each other.
Something I don't really understand about this whole situation is like the youth are angry, and it's understandable why. It's hard to find work. It's hard to find work that's going to pay bills. And a lot of us are forced to just work to be able to not even be able to pay the bills. So 40 hours of our week is gone trying to be able to square it financially, but at the same time, we're still taking out loans and using credit cards. And then people living beyond their means is one of the main pushes on this. I think a lot of people are feeling drawn towards being able to compete with other people who live beyond their means to look more affluent than they really are. And so this is a difficult situation. And so one thing that baffles me is that the youth are having a hard time becoming financially stable in our economy. And who are they blaming, though? I feel like the youth are more aware that it's the world banking system, the cabal, the elite that's behind the government that's really controlling everything and making it hard for us. And so they're angry about that. They're angry about the fact that they can't thrive in our society financially. But they're not necessarily angry at like China or Russia or Israel or Ukraine like the government should be wanting them to be. So how is it that during this golden age of information that we're allowed to be angry at the real enemy, the world government that overruns all of these nations? And are they going to try to discourage them from that by playing on their anger and having them find different people to point fingers at in these little stories that they show them? Does that help them get it off their chests so that they don't do something about it?
It's a very interesting question, looking at it like from a social dynamic, because it used to be very easy, them versus us, you know, the Russians. Let's blame the Russians or the Chinese, but we now realize it's not that simple. Namaste, dear brother. We have another esteemed member of the round table that has joined us. This is Dr. K, dear Kalil, and he's got his own university that he's been running. You can find his channel on my channel if you take a look. All the channels are here, the recommended channels. Indy's channel is starting to get more content on it, I believe. Yes. So yeah, welcome, dear Dr. K, dear brother. He's a numerologist first and foremost, and he practices and does all sorts of gematria and numerology, from Chaldean to the typical numerology that we know, as well as, you know, Hebrewic numerology, and even, I believe, some of the Sumerian numerology as well. He also teaches various different occult therapeutics, wisdom, knowledge of the ancients from the land of Kem. And what a lovely brother. Welcome, dear Dr. K. How are you doing? It's an honor to have you on the show, and thank you for joining us.
Welcome, Khalil.
Thank you so much, Franklin. What's going on, Indy? What's going on, Cosmic? So happy to see y'all. I had a moment to pop in. I heard y'all talking. I wanted to bring some sunlight, man. I know how bleak this year looks to a lot of people already, but I have to point out the other side. I have to point out the sunlight, because there's some beautiful, beautiful things going on right now, especially in terms of the youth. The youth, we hear such adages as like, a child shall lead them. I see that burning beautifully and brilliantly bright right now, because the wood dragon is over, right? The 29th, the wood snake came in, and we have to understand what that means in terms of like the collective, right? So, um, to go from this unrefined, let's take a look at Kundalini, right? If we look at Kundalini, you can understand we used to have a phenomenon that doesn't necessarily exist too much anymore. It's changed, it's alchemized, it's transmuted its form. I'm speaking about spontaneous combustion, right? Spontaneous combustion is what would occur to a large degree when someone would have a Kundalini awakening. And they would begin to rise that Kundalini without the advent of such popular things we have now, like Kundalini yoga, or past life regressions, or even the term, which has become cliche to some people, because a lot of people misuse these terms for a lot of crazy individualistic purposes, as opposed to the collective. And I'm talking about shadow work, right? Shadow work is a beautiful, brilliant science that everyone needs to consistently pour into, especially in terms of themselves, because by doing that to ourselves, it's easier to be that kind of empathetic and to be able to show up for other people, also to allow them to show up as they are without judgment, right? As opposed to this being this cliche thing that we're wishing for, because of this 5D signaling, because of all these towers, especially, once COVID came in, right? 5 years ago, essentially. Now, at this point, people aren't necessarily spontaneously combusting anymore. Now we have these new terms like hyper cancer, right? We have these diseases that are taking on new forms. We have these cycles of bird flu and avian, all these things coming back in not just 30-year cycles, but now 15-year cycles, right? So what does that mean? That means your potential is now greater than ever, right? The aggression of the wood snake has now transmuted into the wood, or I'm sorry, the wood dragon has now transmuted into the wood snake. What does the snake represent? Right? We can go back to the Egyptian pantheon, right? And we can look at pre-dynastic Set, right? If we're familiar with the mythology of Osiris or Asar, right? He was cut into 14 pieces. This was a burial rite from the time of Set, before the written history that we have, right? In other words, the good guy became the bad guy. When Set lost the rebellion, he turned into a snake and went and hid in the earth, right? And Haru flew around, or Horus flew around to make sure that he never showed his head. This is why we get the tenet in Christianity that the head of the serpent is crushed by the heel. Also, it tells you, in terms of this evil, the first description it gives you is that the serpent was the wisest of all creatures. But the general connotation is that the snake was the liar. So we can understand how these things flip and invert over time, especially through the lens of different epochs or schools of thought. So we have to recognize where it is that we are. And if we're not seeing something in terms of the youth, in terms of the availability, in terms of the showing up, in terms of the understanding, in terms of the clarification, then we need to embody that more. We have to be the change we wish to see. Otherwise, we're waiting for someone to show up and to save us. And that's just not going to happen in this year, especially after the year that we just came through. We just came through a universal 8. We're now going into the universal 9. For anybody paying attention, the doomsday clock, right? Alan Moore, one of my favorite occultists, despite the controversy. Alan Moore has spoken about the doomsday clock to a great extent, especially in his narrative of the Watchmen, right? Especially through the lens of V for Vendetta and a host of other magnificent occultic tomes, right? So if the doomsday clock, they just came out with the article stating that it's now 89 seconds away from midnight. What does that mean spiritually? Are we not still in the crux, in the mix of this, moving from this universal 8 to this universal 9? Has this year not come in very hot? Is the rest of the world not still reeling from the idea that Donald Trump is supposedly our president again? There's shockwaves going from coast to coast for one reason or another, and they're going to continue. Let's not forget about California, right? Let's not forget about the intricacies of being available to show up and to help. This year, if nothing else is taken away from the long-winded spiel I just delivered, remember, it's not always about you. We have to be the change that we need to see. To be able to show up for someone else in the capacity which they require is not only a lost art, but it is going to be a requirement in this year.
Yeah, that's a lovely message, brother. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's rather fundamental that this is really the key when we talk about attachment. When we talk about the doomsday clock. That damn clock, man. That clock's been this way and that way and this way and that way. And they were playing with that clock in the Cold War, weren't they? They were like, "Whoa, we're getting close." I think it got to a point where it was almost a minute to midnight, wasn't it? So we've scored 18 seconds.
Close.
So, hey?
It was getting too close at one point.
Yeah. And I do think that, and I agree that there's so much fear-mongery at the moment. And it's not new, but I think this is a big part of like really where we're getting to in this conversation is how much fear does the average person live in? And how does that cut them off from experiencing love? Because if you're in a state of fear, you're not in a state of love. When you're in a state of love, you're not in a state of fear. If there's danger and you've got a child next to you that you love, there is no danger. It's just protect the child.
That's
What
right.
danger? Keep him safe. That's what matters, you know? And so, you know, fear dissolves very fast in the presence of love. It can't stand. But unfortunately, you know, the powers that be, and this is one of those things with all this dark programming, all these movies getting the dark elements, they've got to give the truth to us. So they give us a lot of truth in these movies, but they give it to us with a twist. And the twist is to leave us feeling this sort of empty darkness inside us. The fundamental message behind, the emotional message behind the film often leads to a state of fear and feeling disconcerted. And I think that this is like a real problem. It's obviously not a coincidence. People say, yeah, but they're making films because that's what people want to see. That's what people want to see because that's what people know, because they've been dumbing us down for quite a while. And unfortunately, there has been a certain degree of success in dumbing us down, because this is why we don't have enough conversations with people anymore. Why the young people have these 4-word long text conversations. And that's it. The amount of words that they consider a conversation between two people in the old days was like, hello, how are you? What's going on? You know, where we used to have real conversations a lot more 30 years ago. And you're in the same boat, Carlisle. You know, you've been around a while. You remember the days before the internet was what it is. We used to talk. Yeah, people used to get together and have conversations, and it's like it's becoming a dying art. And the way I see it is like fundamentally, we're at this point now where we do need to start looking outwards. We do need to start getting together. We need to start forming a collective. We need to look at community through new eyes and start to recognize that community isn't what we think it is. You know, it's the people that we can help, the people that can be there for us, the people that are part of a connection, that are able to do positive things together. And it keeps coming to my mind how during the time of the arm prick adventure, there was a lady here who shopped her neighbor to the cops, and he spent the weekend in jail for walking his dog in a beach town where there's hardly anybody here. Like, there was no one in the road. He didn't pose a danger to anyone. But he spent the weekend in jail because one of his fearful neighbors, little old lady, looked out of a window and thought, well, I better call the police, tell them there's a guy walking his dog in the street. Yeah, but like, don't you recognize the guy? It's old John down the road. You know him. You've known him for like 20 years. Yeah? He's walking his dog. He's not in danger. No. I've got to phone the police. So, you know, the fear has gotten to the point where it's actually started to break communities apart. And I noticed this. I had to expel little old ladies from my social group that I run here in Seaforth. I live in Simonstown, Seaforth, and I run the social group for the local community on WhatsApp. And I had to kick out little old ladies because I'd asked them nicely. I was like, look, this isn't Facebook, right? It's a certain kind of conversation that happens on Facebook, which is all good for Facebook. But here, we're not like really trying to have an argument with people. We're not really trying to be, you know, create a war. We're not here to have a huge fight over politics, right? Over, is Trump a good guy or is this one a bad guy? You know, people get so heated. And I had to kick some ladies out of the social group. It became a big thing. They were causing so much trouble with other members in my group. A lot of the people are older, that people started messaging me and saying, look, I can't be in the group anymore because there's that little clique of ladies. So I asked them nicely. I had to start kicking them out one by one. I asked them nicely, sent them private messages. Then they still carried on. Then I sent a message on the group to say, please, no more of this and this and this and this. Updated the group rules. They carried on victimizing people because they are used to victimizing people on Facebook. Well, but they don't share the same opinions that we share. So we're going to get together and we're going to bully them. Bullying is a big problem in the day and age. Well, what do we do about our youngsters when they're living in this social world, which is basically a text-based world? Namaste, Joey. How you doing? Hope you're good. Hope you're well. Hope you're thriving. And they're being conditioned and controlled through peer pressure by people all over the world. I mean, it's reaching the point where children don't talk to each other much anymore. You know, I watch the children at the local school here. Yeah. And it's sad. Do you know the only teenagers that actually talk to each other much are the ones that smoke cannabis down the road before school? You got to laugh, man. These teenagers, they must be like 15, 16, 17, 18. I don't know what age they are. But anyway, they're big kids. They're like technically, legally, maybe most of them might be 18 or 17 because it's a high school. They look like they're adultish. You can't really tell looking at someone. But I noticed these young people, and they're actually the ones standing having conversations, talking about things. And I'll walk up the road, and I still walked up the road. I said, dude, you can't stand here and smoke. This is like a road. Seriously. You know, it doesn't look good in the community, and you're going to get busted here. Like, why don't you guys, there's like loads of like really chilled out places there under the trees where you're off the road, where you can go and do your private thing, you know? So they actually took a page out of that book, and they found a nice little spot under a tree, which was a little clearing to go and do their thing, their little community. But it's interesting to watch these youngsters. They're on their phones before school. They're at my shop. There's a whole lot of benches outside my shop. They're all sitting there at the shop. They're all on their phones. You see them like across the road when the bus is going to come and they're waiting for the bus. They're all on their phones. They're not talking to each other anymore. They're not like a click. When we were young, we were talking to each other all the time. Communication is a lost art. And without communication, how are you supposed to empathize with the person next to you? You tell them what's troubling you. They tell you what's troubling them. You actually start to build an emotional bond because you're talking to each other. But if you just not interested in the people around you because there's more important information coming through your phone, what does that mean?
You know, I know you both, Kalel and Bush Whisperer, were talking about fear. And I think one of the things I kind of wanted to mention, that I think going on culturally, it's not just that they're indoctrinating people with fear, but that they bully and discourage people who try to dispel the fear. I'm sure I'm going to pose this this question to pretty much everybody on the round table or anybody in the chat right now. But have you ever been like tried to, bring up a more optimistic or positive view of the world and people get viscerally angry at you? This seems to happen to me more often than not when you try to be like, it's not so bad. They're like, what? How dare you say that the world's not going to get? It's like there's almost like there's like police. It's like they make you feel afraid of not being afraid. That you feel like if you're like not worried, then there's something wrong with you. You should be afraid like the rest of us. And then they can dogpile on you, and then they either try to make you afraid, or they try to if you're trying to help somebody out who is afraid, they try to discourage it and jump in. Just kind of like in a cult, where if you try to you talk to somebody in the cult, I don't know if you've ever watched like videos where they interview people with a cult. Will interview somebody, and then somebody else from the cult will take that person away from the person being interviewed. Like, no, don't talk to that person. Get away from it. I think there's a lot of that. It's like, I don't know if you guys dealt with that, recently, when it comes to just dealing with other people in general, where they basically just get angry at you for suggesting that things might not be as bad as they seem.
All the time. But it's not. You have to realize who you're talking to. You have to realize where you may be, and you have to understand the climate and the umbrella energy, especially that we are collectively in. Because regardless of whether we're getting political or whether we're getting spiritual, people don't know how to deal with happiness. And it's gotten to the point where it's like, how dare you? How can you possibly be happy when children are being trafficked and women are being disrespected, and we don't have equal rights, and it's 2025 and we're still dealing with this? Say all of that to a baby. Say all of that to a baby living in a cardboard box on a rainy day with only a cat to care for it. As extreme as that is, that baby is going to be having a ball because it doesn't know anything different. When you're born in chaos, when you're surrounded by disparity and some of these other more negative connotations, those things are to be expected. But there's always going to be somebody in that environment, in those circumstances, who sees the brighter side. So what are we going to choose to focus on? Because there will always be another problem. There will always be another agenda. There will always be something that's being pushed by the powers that should not be. And we can focus on that. Or we can focus on the magic that these babies are doing. We can focus on the magic that these wonderful parents and substitutes are doing, because that miracle work is also always being done. But if we wait for the media to tell us, if we wait for the birds to come back and tell us that, we're going to be waiting a long time. We got to go out and be that change.
Yeah, and I agree. That this is an interesting point that you're bringing up, Cosmic, and what you're adding to Kalal. I think it's a big problem that people are ready to fight over nonsense. I think what it is people are just programmed into fear, and when you're programmed into fear, as Any good kinesiologist would tell you, hey, Mexico, it's going to activate your triple burner. And your triple burner is going to have one or two responses, fight or flight. You either go and hide in a corner and hide behind your texts and pretend that you're not here, pretend la 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 land, fill yourself with computer games and stuff and not engage with people and just engage with the AI systems as much as you can to like dizzy yourself out of reality. Or, you know, you go in and you start talking to people and you start facing the fear. And very often that will lead to the fight response. So people are looking for a fight. And I think it's also by design. Let's face it, like the fear is not an accident. We're not just, we're afraid. The news, all the crap that they broadcasted at us has been designed to make us afraid. The films, the Hollywood, the way that they twist the mythology that they feed back to us, they always add a negative twist on it, you know? So even Superman has become dark, right? Superman was a good guy. Superman was there to save the world. He was selfless. He was devoted. No, Superman can go dark. So we're living in an age where even our heroes can sometimes be a bit narcissistic. And we see this in the films. The heroes in the films are becoming more and more narcissistic. You know, you see this in The Punisher, for example, the good guy. The good guy's not really that good. So, you know, we our mythology in our heads being twisted and confused. And I think that something you said earlier, Kalal, about the Kundalini is a really interesting point. You know, the shadow work. Yes, Mexico, exactly. The shadow work that we need to be doing is not being done. We're not giving the attention to actually, hold on, there's fear. Let's face the fear. There's negative stuff in the world. Let's have a constructive conversation about what's negative, not one where we become angry or fearful, because being fearful, being angry, is not productive. Let's bring out the shadow. Let's take a look at these emotions. Let's talk about it. People don't want to talk about these things. They want to rant about it. They want to get angry about it, like the young generation you're talking about, Cosmic. And they're ready to fight because they know that it's wrong. And I can completely appreciate where the younger generation's coming from, right? Like they're growing up in the world and they can see where our controllers want to take the world, right? Because they can see where the controllers want to take our world, they become pessimistic, which is sort of understandable if we can empathize with the younger generation. We grew up in a world where the world was our oyster. There was like positive possibilities ahead of us. But the youngsters are growing up in a world where they know that the governments have been playing games, pretending that this 19 virus is the end of the world and that, you know, they're going to control every aspect of your life to the point where it's much more difficult for younger peoples to adjust to the world, because the world is moving faster than it ever was moving. And we get taught to believe that all this fast movement in the world is natural. But how much of it is orchestrated by fashion, by media, by, you know, entertainment? So I do think that there's a big role to look at here when we look at the Kundalini